Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the OmiLab seminar. Hi. I want to introduce Dr. Renana Keydar. Dr. Renana Keydar is an assistant professor of law and digital humanities at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Until recently, she was a postdoctoral fellow in the Martin Buber Society of Fellows at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. She holds an MA degree in law from Tel Aviv University and a PhD in comparative literature from Stanford University. In her research, she is bringing together law and the humanities, and it sounds a bit like a poem in her personal website, Law and Literature, Culture and the Humanities, Post-Conflict Justice. Renana, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you very much, Violet, for inviting me and for this nice introduction. So what I'm going to talk about today is between close and distant reading in analyzing legitimation narratives and police use of force. And essentially what I'm trying to do here in a collaboration with three of my colleagues, Yael Itmanovich, Badi Chassisi from the Criminology Institute in the Hebrew University and Yoav Kanto from the Data Science Institute, is to offer a new model for engaging with testimonial narratives that expands beyond the confines of the specific research. And I will try to show both the potential applications for such a model and also to show you a specific case study for which we actually developed it, which is a very timely case study on police use of force in the case of the Or Commission of Inquiry. I will go back to that. But before I touch on the specifics of the case study, I wasn't sure about who is precisely the audience here. So I wanted to say that my project begins with the notion of Franco Moretti's distant reading, which basically says we have too many texts to engage with. We have too many books to read, if you want, beyond the canon. And he develops this notion of distant reading that is premised on algorithmic analysis or computational reading, if you want, of narratives, of texts. So if I go back to one of his earlier, most fundamental writings, Conjectures on World Literature, Franco Moretti says, perhaps, and he's talking about world literature, he's talking about how we can extend beyond the canon of European literature or Anglo-American literature to examine the world literature. And while it's very literary in its beginnings, what I want to take from it and what was taken from it in a sense in the last 20 years is this notion that we need something different. And I want to quote here, perhaps it's too much tackling the world and the unread at the same time, but I actually think that it's our greatest chance because the sheer enormity of the text makes it clear that world literature, and here I think you can replace it with anything that is indeed the sheer enormity of the text, cannot be literature bigger. What we are already doing, just more of it. That cannot. It has to be different. The categories have to be different. A new science emerges where a new problem is pursued by a new method. That's the point. World literature is not an object, it's a problem. And I suggest to take this kind of a view of Franco Moretti and develop it exactly along the lines that he suggests a few pages afterwards, but the trouble with close reading, which is exactly I'm unmuted now. Okay.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. So close reading, of course, is modeled against, distant reading is modeled against close reading. And the trouble with close reading, says Moretti, who is an expert, of course, on close reading. He is a top eminent professor of European literature, wrote close reading analysis of many of the books in the European canon, and he says it is that it is necessarily depends on an extremely small canon. This may have become an unconscious and invisible premise by now, but it is an iron one nonetheless. You invest so much in individual texts only if you think that very few of them really matter. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. And if you want to look beyond the canon, close reading will not do it. It is not designed to do it. It is designed to do the opposite. And then it says at the bottom, it's a theological... it's a theological exercise, the very solemn treatment of few texts taken very seriously, whereas that we really need is a little pact with the devil. We know how to read text, now let's learn how not to read them. And that's exactly Moretti's suggestion for distant reading. And what I want to suggest today, in a way, is not only that we need to expand the canon, which is that was the motivation of Moretti, or to do things not the same but bigger or just more of that, but that we actually have, and I will talk about it in a second in the context of my own research, we have an obligation, a moral obligation, not to lose sight of the specific text that we're dealing with. And I'll explain precisely why when I talk about the context of my research. I just want to add two more quotes to frame our conversation. Martin Paul Eve, that wrote a book, Close Reading with Computers, has the metaphor of moving between the microscope and the telescope. And he says, distant reading then, and its related forms of cultural analytics, algorithmic criticism, various modeling techniques, and writing machines is concerned with reductive, but nonetheless labor-saving methods that use the untiring repeatability of computational tasks to garner statistically informed deductions about novels or other works that one has not read. And again, I want to take what Martin Paul Eve says and add another layer to our motivation to move from close to distant reading, or to move between close and distant reading. And it's not only to harness the computational powers to do, garner statistically informed deductions, but it's really about the possibility to engage with reading of a whole corpus of narratives, a whole corpus of, in our case, testimonies, against the possibility of not losing sight of the individual testimony. And that's what stands at the heart of my, if you want, intervention. And I'll just finish with one of the most canonical texts, if you want, from the computational social sciences, by the very famous article by Grimmer and Stewart, Text as Data. We emphasize that the complexity of language implies that automated content analysis, which is what we do in distant reading, will never replace careful and close reading of text. Rather, the methods that we profile here are best thought of as amplifying and augmenting careful reading and thoughtful analysis. So if I take all this, and in that I finish the theoretical, if you want, the theoretical survey that I'm offering here, if I take all of that, we start to understand that there is some tension between close reading and distant reading, and between the different motivations, if you want, to bringing the two together. And also the pragmatical question, or the practical computational question, how do you bring close and distant reading together? Do you perform close reading and then just distant reading? How do you manage to bring them together? And that's exactly what my talk will be. And the context of my talk is not just, if I go back to Grimmer and Stewart, we're not just talking about text as data. I specifically talk about testimonies as data. So my research, when I did my PhD at Stanford, my topic of analysis was indeed interdisciplinary, very analog, traditional analysis of law and literature, looking at post-conflict or post-atrocity mechanisms from this law and literature perspective. And what I became very much aware of is that in every mechanism that I examined, and I'm giving here the example of the Eichmann trial because in the Israeli context is very well known, we don't just face a testimony of a witness with all the questions that relate to it, traumatic memory, the re-traumatization, the reliability of memory, and all these questions. We, in fact, cannot ask this question regarding an individual testimony. There is never an individual testimony. We're always in the presence of plurality of testimony. So if I go back to what Franco Moretti told us, we are in the bigger. And the question is whether the sheer enormity of the volume of testimonies that we have allows us or entails that we need to develop new methodologies to listen to them. And what I'm saying, it does not apply only on the context of the Eichmann trial or historic Holocaust tribunals. The question or the dilemma that we face here is how to listen to all the testimonies, and it can be in the international criminal tribunals, as you see in the middle picture, regarding the Yugoslavia tribunals, or the Eichmann trial, or the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions of South Africa, or in fact, any other mechanism, legal or non-legal, also the archives in that sense, the historical archives, that has the human voice, human narration of survivors, of victims in its center. And plenty of the mechanisms and agencies working in the field of human rights are in fact based on the voice of the victim, of the voice of the survivor. And my question coming from law and literature is, how do we listen to all of the testimonies without losing sight and sound of the singular voice? How do we respect our commitment to the individual victim or survivor, to let them tell their story, but without, again, losing sight of the bigger picture? And the context to which I want to bring all of these theoretical and literary perspective is the context of protest policing. So that's a little bit of a jump here, and I'm taking us from the, the bigger, if you want, or harder field of mass atrocity and post-conflict justice to a question of a very systematic and contemporary, unfortunately, human rights violation that exist in all democratic liberal democracies. And the question is, and the pictures here, of course, from the recent protest in Balfour, or the Balfour protest around the country. And the question is, how can we explain, this is my legal question, if you want, or criminological question. How can we explain the gap between the democratic right to protest, that is the basic of democracy, and you don't need to be a lawyer to know that, and the very prevalent phenomenon of repressive protest policing? And you don't need to go far to see the protests that they developed after the as part of the Black Lives Matter movement, or protests that become violent in any other subject. There were plenty of these in the capitals of Europe around the COVID-19 lockdowns. We saw the protest in the Capitol, but I won't touch that. There was not much of police violence there. Some said unjustifiably. But I think we can all understand that it's a very pertinent question and very prevalent one. Why do we still see repressive protest policing when there is such a fundamental democratic right to protest? And the explanations in the literature, and here I'm just taking you to a really small survey of criminological and legal literature on protest policing or police use of force, offer three levels of explanation. Very, very briefly, we'll call it macro, meso, and micro. The macro level looks at the state. Is the state strong or weak? Does the state need to uphold its legitimacy? Is the minority group or the protesting group is a minority that somehow challenges the legitimacy of the state? And all these explanations relate to the relationship between the state and the minority group that is protesting. Then there is meso-level explanation that really deal with the police organization. So what are the tools that the police had at hand? What are the policies? What is the history of the police force? Is it a very racist police force? Is it a very hegemonic or, very minority-driven police force? All these questions belong to the meso level. And then we have the micro level, which these are explanations for police use of force that are really focused on the incident level. How many protesters were there? How many police and protest ratio was? What did the protesters do? So it's a much more, if you want, factual, very tied to the circumstances. What is the problem with these three levels? The problem is that if you check all these very, very robust, rigorous academic research, many of them are very empirical, rooted in facts, you see that they don't talk to one another. You have some explanations that offer a macro level, some that offer a meso, some that offer a micro level, and at the end, we are still, remain with the prevalent phenomenon of police use of force. So each of these explanations that does not account for the gap between the ideal of protest, of the right to protest, and the reality of repressive policing. And what I want to do is go back to the Orr Commission of Inquiry. I'll talk about it in a second to remind us all what do I refer to, and to understand how a democratic society legitimizes repressive protest policing. So what we want to argue, what I and my colleagues in this paper want to argue, is that when we look at the existing academic literature that looks at the three levels or through three different perspectives, what we're missing out is the bigger picture. the bigger picture being that we need to account for all the perspectives of all the people or players, actors involved in an event of repressive protest policing in order to really understand how does a democratic society legitimizes in the sense of explains, makes sense to itself, the use of force against civilian protesters. And for that, we go to the Orr Commission of Inquiry. So just to remind us all, the Orr Commission of Inquiry investigated the clashes between Arab Israelis that protested it was around the beginning of the Second Intifada, essentially the beginning of the Second Intifada, following the ascent to the Temple Mount of the opposition leader then, Ariel Sharon, that led to really widespread demonstrations that turned into violent clashes with police all around the northern parts of Israel, also in Jerusalem, but the Jerusalem riots, the East Jerusalem riots were not included in the mandate of the Commission of Inquiry. And the Commission of Inquiry was a state commission, so the National Commission of Inquiry, the highest body of inquiry. And I just want to, draw your attention to the mandate that was given to it. The committee will investigate the unfolding of the events and will make findings and conclusions regarding everything that happened in them and regarding the causes that led to these events taking place, including instigators and organizers, participants in the events from all sectors and the security forces. So the Orr Commission of Inquiry took upon itself a very, very broad task. It saw itself as really investigating the entire, if you want, circumstances and background leading to the Orr events, to the October 2000 events. And what we have as a result is a very, very rich body of text. We have 92 sessions that took place in open session, with 370 testimonies, out of which 188 belong to police officers from all ranks. So from the field, really field officers, magavnikim, so the border police, all the way to the commissioner of police, Mafkal HaMishtarah, the commissioner of police, Yuda Vilk, then. We have 700 pages of the final reports and 1.5 million words in the testimonies themselves. So we brought together both the testimonies and the final report. And taking all this together, the question is, how can you read all that? So how can you really listen to all the testimonies and the conclusions of the commission that represent, if you want, the voice of the state, and not lose sight of the specific testimonies? And again, you can say, why do you care about this specific testimony? But that is exactly my commitment, if you want, as a scholar of law and literature. I am interested in the voice, in the singular voice of the testimony. So for me, it's really crucial to go back, to be able to go back and tie between the, if you want, the large scale and the very small scale. And what, if I follow what Franco Moretti told us in Conjectures on World Literature, what we need, it's a new problem that requires new methodological tool that will help us make sense of all the testimonies and all the legitimation narratives together. So what do we have here? What we proposed in the article that is still under review, so that's why I didn't send it to you, is a scaled reading model that aims to capture the plurality of perspectives and legitimation narratives. And we begin with the large scale reading that basically performs a topic modeling analysis, an LDA, identifying the topics comprising the protocols using this LDA topic modeling. And then we have the mid-scale reading that maps the key speakers of in each of the topics. And we identified, we labeled in advance each testimony for the speaker of this testimony according to 4 groups. The police, again, all police officers, all ranks, all positions, the Arab speakers, and here we included both, you know, victims or witnesses, people that participated in the protest, but also Arab speakers from the public sector. So there were speakers, both politicians and experts and public figures, civil leaders. So they were all included in the Arab group. And then we had the state group. And the state group here is the voice of the commissioners. We had 3 commissioners, essentially 4. One of them was replaced due to health reasons during the commission. And then we have also the report itself. And we have another group, but I'm putting it aside because it was not, there weren't many testimonies in the other group. The journalists, we couldn't divide it to more sections. And the mid-scale reading basically mapped the key speaker or the key speaker group for each of the topics. And then in the small scale, what we did is to focus, we built a mathematical model. I will explain on all the phases in a second. And we built a mathematical model that identifies the most representative testimony in each of the topics. And the reason why we did that, and that's crucial for me, is in order to tie between the large scale and the small scale. Let me explain. What we did at the beginning is to look at as many of us do when we do our research, we just looked at some of the more, if you want, prominent or highlighted testimonies. There was a testimony of one of the police officers, the head of the sniper police, the sniper unit, which was in charge, the sniper units were in charge of many of the fatalities, of the casualties. And he said things that were very, it was a very easy catch, if you want. We're fighting on our home, it's a battle, it's a fight, it's a milchama, it's a war going on there. And it was very easy to, write an article about, I don't know, you can play with here with any provocative argument you want to make, how the Israeli police is very racist. It sees the Arab minority as its enemy, and it's all fine. I mean, maybe you can write a very, very good article doing this kind of close reading. But what bothered me when I saw these previous drafts of such an argument is that it's very anecdotal. And then we thought maybe we'll compare, or maybe we'll do this kind of close reading in comparison with a topic modeling. And that's what we did essentially. We began with just doing a topic modeling of the entire corpus and trying to map out the themes. But that also caused, if you want, this tension or this gap between the choosing, if you want, of the specific testimonies for the small scale and the thematic topical analysis in the large scale. And what we wanted here, that was the methodological challenge, if you want, or the computational challenge, is to find a model that will allow me to hierarchically choose the testimony that is most representative of the topics that we already computationally selected using the LDA algorithm. So I will explain it more in a second, but I just want you to understand that that was our challenge, not just to perform separately a small, a close reading and a distant reading, but to create them using the same model, the same computational logic. So, sorry, I'm just turning off my heating. Because
Renana, can I ask a technical question regarding the language, please? It goes without saying that everything was in Hebrew or some of Arabic?
No, so it's a very good question. So let me take you maybe already to here. I wasn't sure if all the viewers will speak Hebrew or know Hebrew, but I really wanted to leave the word clouds in Hebrew. So you can really see, the Hebrew speakers among you will see it. Of course, in the article, we translated it, but everything was in Hebrew. So some of the testimonies were given in Arabic, but they were translated, and the transcripts, which I should say right now already, that the transcripts were, while these were open session of a National Commission of Inquiry, you can't find the transcripts. They're not available. There's no website for the commission. You can hardly find the final volume, so the 5 volumes of the final report. You can hardly find them online. You can find them in the library, of course, in a book form, although they were from 2002, 2003. They're not available online. A journalist uploaded them online, but again, it's not a verified version. It's not, so it's very, very frustrating. And we managed to get a hold of the testimonies from a colleague of mine in the Institute of Criminology, but they're not available. So it's really a very pioneer view of this very important corpus of testimonies, because the Orr Commission, in a way, was dubbed, well, at the beginning of it at least, was dubbed as the Israeli Truth and Reconciliation Commission, because it took a very, very broad stance. And it was basically the first state-mandated body that examined the roots of the discrimination against the Arab sector in Israel. So it could have had the potential to be such a truth and reconciliation, well, at least a truth commission. It was really a very massive investigatory effort into the reasons and the, and the cause roots for the discrimination of Arab and the Arab violence at the end that outburst in the protests, but it never reached this kind of public acknowledgement. And one of our motivations is not only to understand repressive policing, but it's also to shed light on such an important corpus. So the entire corpus is in Hebrew, and that's why I also bring the results in Hebrew. And that's the results, or that's the finding from the first stage of analysis. So that's the large scale. We just ran it through a very, simple topic modeling, LDA, Bly's LDA, nothing through using Genzim, the Genzim wrapper for the mallet for the LDA. And we chose 15 topics. I can talk more about the computational choices if you want. If anyone wants to interfere with the question, it's fine. I mean, you're welcome to ask questions during also. And what we got were these 15 topics. And you have the word clouds here with the 20 top words. Each word cloud represents a topic with the most prevalent words within each topic. And you can start making sense of what are the topics. And that's, again, for all the testimonies and for the final report all together. So we train the model on all the corpus together. And you can start making sense here of some of the, the themes that come up. And if you look, for example, on this theme, you have here Arab and mosque and public and event and Aqsa, which is the Al-Aqsa, and the Hamsha and the movement, and so it's the follow-up, the high follow-up movement or committee, which is the representative body of the Arab sector in Israel. And if you want here, you have a event, Yamam, which is the special force of the police, force, Paulus, which is the main street in Nazareth, policemen. You have a lot, the word police and police force. You have topics here that are more procedural in their nature, like, announcement, section, protocol, testimony, paragraph. So if I go through all these, topics that came out and I give them some name, and here I have to, for those of you who are not familiar with topic modeling, that's the result of the topic modeling. It's an unsupervised method that tells you what are the latent themes in your entire corpus. But it doesn't give me any titles. It doesn't give me any labels. It's completely unsupervised. It doesn't have any knowledge of my corpus except for the words in it. It's a bag of words model that through a process of a statistical process of probabilities generates these topics. And I, as the researcher, give name or give meaning to the choices that the algorithm made regarding which words are most likely to come together in a document. And I gave these labels, if you want, to the topics, and you're welcome, of course, to challenge me or to tell me that you think that, it's not accurate. That's precisely what I like about topic modeling, is that you see the words. I didn't code them now into something else, and now I'm just telling you these are the themes. You see the words that made me make the choice, the interpretive choice that I made regarding them. So if we look back at this topic, I called it our political identity. And if we look at that, I call it shooting, the police angle for shooting. And if you look, I don't know, at this procedural topic, I called it commission work administrative. And of course, again, you can give it other names. What's important to see, what I try to show here also by the names that I've given, is that you can see themes, or if you want, clusters of topics. So we have a topic that deals with the political identity of the Arabs, this one and this one, so 0 and 9. You can see several topics that cohere into a cluster of the commission work, so 3, 6, and 12. And you can see topics that cohere around the police, so not specific events, but if you remember the meso level of the police organization, so police, for example, police means and weapons, or police command, or police field work. And you see also topics that are much more, if you remember again, from the micro level, okay? So if that represents this cluster of the Arab political identity, 0 and 9, represent, if on the face of it, a very macro level ideological explanation. We have a state that is battling a minority that is considered as an enemy or as a, intention with. Then we also have the micro level of the very specific incident descriptions and actions, okay? Ra'a, alach, yada, so walked, knew, went, arrived, began. It's very rooted in the specificities of the incident. So if you remember, after we mapped the large scale, we moved to the mid scale, because now we want to start understanding which speaker group invoked which of these topics. Can we, if you want, identify voices that relate to these topics? Because at the moment, all we have is a map of topics for the entire corpus. We don't know which, which element or which party to the commission invoked these topics. And here what you see is a bar graph that gives you some analysis of each topic. So you see here, I gave you the names of the topics just to remind you. And you see each topic, who is the most, the group that is most associated with this topic. So if you want, for example, I'm inviting anyone that has questions to pose them. For example, the Arab political identity, if you see, the highest bar is the OR report. So the topic of the Arab political identity, what we saw before of the Al-Aqsa and mosque and the follow-up commission and all that, is not raised by the Arabs, which is the orange group, okay? And it's not raised by the police. So it's not the police that is, if you want, invoke an ideological explanation of why did we shoot the Arabs. If I'm giving some paraphrasing here. No, it's the OR report, and if you want, what we term the voice of the state. And we'll see in a second when we do the close reading, we'll see in what context is it invoked. If I go to another topic, so topic number 10, which is police means and weapons, indeed is raised most strongly, most prominently by the police. So the police, if you want, is talking. We don't know in what context yet, but we know that the police is the most prominent speaker group that invokes the topic of the police, the means and weapons of the police that are used to combat or confront riots or demonstrations. And you can do the same for each of the topics. And if I want to just give you another, it's the same information, just in a different visualized way. Then you can see here the composition of each of the speaker groups. So now you can see from the perspective of the speaker group, what were the two main topics, if you want, that each speaker group was most engaged with. So, and I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that we have both the judges and the OR report. And as you can see, it's not the same composition. The judges refer to all the interventions of the commissioners, of the 3 commissioners during the proceedings. And that differs from the report, the final report, which is not, the final report is a unanimous report. It's just a report written by the commission as a whole. And in the article, we have a whole section comparing between the commissioner's position during the proceedings and the final report itself, which represents, if you want, the position of the state. The reason why it's really important to look at what the judges did, and that's maybe from a more legal perspective, is that the judges, the commissioners in the commission were in charge of 30% of the words of the commission. 30% of the corpus was spoken by the commissioners. The commissioners, if I want to paraphrase it, the commissioners had a very, very active role. In a way, in many, many accounts, again, I have all the information in the paper, hopefully it will one day be published, there were many, many interactions between commissioners and a witness that the commissioners gave the whole, if you want, statement, and the witness at the end just said yes. In a way, if you want, you can say that these are words that the witness should have been ascribed to the witness, but of course we can't do this kind of games. So that's why we chose to specifically examine also the commissioner's view. So if I put together the large and mid scale of reading, we have the topical analysis of an entire topic, and then we start to map out who are the speakers that spoke each of the topics. And from that, we want to move to the final level, which is the small scale analysis. And what we want to look at here is what is the context? What is the most representative testimony for each of the topics? By whom was it spoken? In which context? And in that way, we hope, that was our argument, we can do a close reading, not of an arbitrary anecdotal text that we just, caught our eye because it was very fascinating in a way, or very outlying, radical in a way, but of a text that is most statistically relevant to the composition of each of the topics. And I'm showing here just a visual graphics of the mapping of the mathematical model that we did. We didn't want to take the topic that was just most, we didn't want to take, okay, I'll walk you through slowly. We have here the graph of each of the scatter plot of each of the topics, so the 15 topics that we have. And for each of them, we mapped out the most representative document. And what is important for us to show, or what's important to note here, is that we didn't choose the document that had this topic as the most, at the most probability. So the highest probability for this topic. I will explain. We can have one testimony, okay? Remember, this is the topic, for example, topic 0 is the topic of the Arab political identity. We can have one testimony as the results of the topic modeling analysis that only speaks of topic number 0. It's 100% topic number 0. Actually, you can't really have it, but because of the conditions of the model, but let's say for the sake of argument, I don't want to choose this one. I don't want to choose, for that matter, this document, the one that I'm circling here. I want to choose the topic that is most representative of the composition of this topic, taking into consideration all the other topics. So I want to choose the topics that is the best representative of this topic in context of the entire corpus. I won't tire you with the mathematical model that we created here. It's not very complex. We just try to map out something that is more balanced between the highest probability and the relationship to the other topics. And what we ended up with is this table, because we chose, if you see here, you only have the orange dot, which is the most representative document. But in fact, what we did is to look at the 3 most representative testimonies in order to avoid arbitrariness, because the results were very close to one another. And as you can see, topic number 0 indeed is comprised of 3 texts from the O report. Topic number 1, which belonged to the which the most representative speaker group was the police, indeed comes from 3 testimonies of police officers, and so forth. And that's just the table to show you which documents we looked at. And now I want to take you through, and again, I chose text in Hebrew. I'm happy to translate, but I wanted the Hebrew speakers of you to see the actual results. And I want to focus on 3 themes, if you want. And the first theme, and each of these themes relate to each of the levels that we identified in the literature. If you remember, there was the micro, meso, and the macro. And I'm starting with the micro level, with the incident descriptions, and you have here, to remind you, the word cloud of the topic. And we know that it's a topic that is most associated with the Arab speaker group. And now I'm going to dive in and do the close reading, not on an arbitrary text, but and not even on an arbitrary text from the Arab speaker group, but of the text that most represent this topic. And if I look here, and I'm taking you, I will read in Hebrew. And is there anyone that doesn't speak Hebrew? Can I read in Hebrew? Anyone wants translation? Okay, so I'm reading in Hebrew. השופט תיאודור אור, אתה ראית אם זרקו אבנים באותה הזדמנות? טארק. אני שמעתי מהאנשים שהיו בתהלוכה. לא ראיתי שום אבן שנזרקה לעבר השוטרים, השוטרים היו במרחק גדול, שאילו אפילו אם הייתה נזרקת אבן לעברן, היא הייתה לא מגיעה, כי היו במרחק גדול מהשוטרים. לא הייתה סכנה ממש לשוטרים כדי לירות על האנשים. השופט אור, אחד הקומישיונר, השאלה, תעזוב רגע את הסכנה, האם זרקו אבנים? טארק, לא, אני לא ראיתי אף אחד, כולם היו בתהלוכה עם סיסמאות וקריאות. זה הטקסט המייצג הראשון. הטקסט המייצג השני, באותה, שוב, תראו כמה זה קשור אחד לשני בהקשר, הלאה. השופט תיאודור אור, אתה יודע מה הצעירים עשו שם? עלה, הם זרקו אבנים. היו שני שוטרים שעמדו למעלה, הם ירו על המפגינים כדורי גומי. מה עשו הצעירים? אני שאלתי אותך. השוטרים ירו כדורי גומי. הצעירים יידו אבנים. שוואי, זרקו אבנים. כמה צעירים היו שם? ואז עלה מוסיף, אני כשעליתי לא התכוונתי לזרוק אבנים, אבל כשהחלו השוטרים לקלל את הנביא מוחמד ואת האסלאם, התרגזתי והתחלתי לזרוק אבנים. הטקסט האחרון שאני מצטטת מפה זה של מחמוד, השופט אור, כן, והיו שם זרקו אבנים שם, מוחמד בדקה לא היה זריקת, מחמוד בדקה לא היה זריקת אבנים. דקה לפני זה לא. אמרתי לך שהיה זריקת אבנים, רק על ג'יפ זה לפני שמגיעים אלינו. אז בדקה הזאת לא היה בכלל. If I want to tie all the levels of what we just said, we saw that this is a topic that on its face look like a topic that dealing with the micro-level analysis of the incident, okay? And we see words that are very descriptive, saw, went, knew, arrived, road, village, through, stones. It's a very descriptive topic of the happenings of a riot or of a repressive policing of a protest. But what we see when we dive in is already the tension. So we see here a combat, if you want, a competition between two legitimation narratives. One legitimation narrative, a proposed one by the commissioner, by Theodore Orr, really pushes for a very objective, if you want, view. Objective in the sense of factual. He wants to know about the precise moment of the stone throwing. So the questions of the Theodore Orr are very much tied up to the micro level of the incident. Please tell me if you threw stones. I don't care about the big picture. And we have it here, and we have it here, and we have it here. What do we see when we look at the Arab speakers, at the Arab testimonies? They answer within the confines of the incident. That's the questions that are posed to them, but they resist. In all the three answers that we see here, we see a kind of a challenge to the linearity of the narrative. In here, he says, there wasn't any danger to the police. So the police just started, shooting at us, not because we provoked them. And here the same thing. He's challenging the linearity. It was first the police that shot the rubber bullets, only then the youngsters threw the stones, okay? And here he mentions another provocation on the side of the police, that they started cursing Prophet Muhammad and the Islam. So we see that even within a topic that is very much, if you want, rooted in the facts of the incident, in the circumstances of the incident, we have also an ideological perspective brought about by the Arab speakers that says it's not just about who threw the stones or who threw who shot threw the stones first. It's about a battle between the Jewish police and the Arab Muslim youth. It's about provoking us. It's about being in far away distance from us and still shooting at us. And we have all that only when we dive in with the knowledge of the large scale and mid-scale into the small scale. I want to give you another example from a meso-level analysis, if you want. So the meso-level is relating, if you remember, to the organizational level. And here it's a little bit more complex. So the topic I'm dealing with is topic number 10, the means and weapons of the police. And you have here all the words that relate to rubber bullets and gas and and meters, so the range from which the officers shot, and the chain of command, so diber, spoke, shot, received, weapon, event, meter, remembered, arrived. It's all about how you reach the decision to shoot and which to shoot. And here you see Chaim, one of the police officers. And Chaim says, you see a lot of shields. So he's referring to these plastic shields that protect officers in protests, but not in Israel. And he explains, because the commissioner is asking him, why do we see it in the television and you don't have it? And he says, you do see in the television a lot of these shields, but unfortunately, that's not the situation in Israel. Here you have, my rough estimation, 700 protesters and 4,000 officers. I was with 5 officers. I cannot stand that. I cannot be static. I have to move all the time. The same thing in Nazareth. Thousands of people, thousands of, he says, Bakbukim, he refers to Molotov cocktails. Thousands of stones thrown at us, Molotov cocktails, shooting. I cannot be static and absorb. It's impossible. So there is a fight here about what are the right means of protest policing to be used, assuming that if they had the shields, they wouldn't need to shoot on the protesters, leading to the live shooting, live ammunition, leading to the casualties. And Chaim, the police officer, is rejecting this notion and is bringing us again between the level of the meso level of the police organization, what are the tools at hand, what are the policies for shooting, and the incident level, telling the commissioner, you don't understand. It's not about what is the policy. It's not about, yes, they gave us, and it says here, it is available. We have the shields. We know how to use them, but we weren't asked to use it, and that's it. He's telling the commissioner, you don't understand anything. It's not about having the right or wrong tool. It's about the situation. You don't understand how it was. And then Chaim continues. It was a very charged, each of the testimonies was very, very charged, moving between several locations, moving across days. It's very, very also hard to map out. So a person that, Chaim explains how does the chain of command works. And he says, it's true that when I'm with the team and the team is with me, I can say Zain or Mem, they're snipers, so their identities are disguised, shoot weapons. Shoot means, sorry, I jumped, I'm sorry. And they shoot. In this specific event, as I said, I was stretched on 250 meters and not always with my team. There were circumstances in which teams were alone. So a person that is in a situation where he needs to shoot means won't come to me and call me and say, Chaim, I need to shoot means now. I need a confirmation from you. That cannot be. Okay, we see here again here it is the police, before it was the our speakers, here's the police officers that reject the notion that you can limit the understanding of why protest policing, why repressive policing took place, because there was not the right tool or there was not, the right policy. And they're saying, you don't understand, it has nothing, there are two things intermingled here. And in a different situation, Professor Shimon Shamir, another commissioner, says, I'm asking you about the range because it's important. If you think that 150-meter range, an officer is already in danger, that it already justifies his action. And Micha is saying, I'm saying, the danger can be a danger to get wounded, to get an eye out. It can be something else. It can be a danger to kill, because to shoot from 150 meter, it can kill. And like a metal ball can take out an eye or make a hole in your skull. So he's explaining, I know that according to the policy, I'm not supposed to defend myself with live ammunition from 150-meter range because it's not dangerous still, which is the justification for using live ammunition. But I was in such a situation in which also from 150 meter, they can hurt me. They can puncture my skull or take out my eye. We see here again how in each of these situations, both in the previous explanation and in this explanation, the levels of legitimation narratives are intermingled. The commissioners speak in one level, perhaps the meso level, and the officers respond in a micro level. Or if you take it to the previous example with Arab speakers, we saw how the commissioners speak from a very, incident, micro level based explanation or seeking this kind of explanation. And the Arab speakers resent it and reject it and offer a macro level explanation. It is all about being Arab. If I move to the last example, and with this I will close and open to your questions. The last example is from the most, if you want, on its face, a macro level analysis or a macro level explanation of the Arab political identity. And as you remember, this topic, quite surprisingly already in the mid-scale, came from the report, not from the Arabs themselves. So it's not the Arabs that speak about their political identity, it's the report. And when we saw these results, that it's from the report and which sections were selected by the computer, by the computational analysis, we assumed that it will speak about, how the Arabs were, a discriminated minority. And there are parts like that in the report, but not relating to this topic. And if you see the words here, the word cloud, you're reminded of what is this topic about. And then you dive into the most representative parts in the report, and you see that it says that it's very critical of the Arab politicians. And it says, survey of the events show clearly that despite the slide from organized protests to uncontrolled riots repeats itself again and again, the Arab leadership did not show any tendency to learn the lesson. It did not it did not took means to prevent the escalating to violence. It did not include in its orders for protests any warnings against breaking the law. So we see here that the use of the Arab political topic is actually used against the Arab leadership. And again, in another section of the report, a different section altogether, the monitoring committee, again, the Arab representative body, did not call to restrain or uphold the order. This is even though some of its members confirmed that in the situation, it was very dangerous, or there was a big potential for riots in deciding to send the Arab public, the Arab sector, the Arab crowds to the streets, closing the schools. And they're blaming basically the Arab leadership for not doing what it can to stop the violence. So it's blaming the Arab leadership. That's if you want, the legitimation narrative here for the repressive policing is the lack of leadership on the side of the Arab politicians or the Arab representative. If I want to bring everything together, I want to make my conclusions in two different levels. One of them is in the methodological level. So we see here that the scaled reading manages to listen to all the narratives in an aggregated manner, but without compromising the individual story and the specific context. And that's what was important for me when for us, when we built the scaled reading model. In the large scale, we saw how we managed to reveal types of explanation of repressive protest policing. In the mid-scale, we saw how we can identify which speaker group invoked which explanation. In the small level, we saw how we exposed the context in which each legitimation was invoked. If I move to a broader, if you want a legal or criminological explanation, through the scaled reading, so through this methodological approach, we saw the dynamic use of different legitimations for repressive policing. So we begin to understand how repressive policing occurs only by examining how these legitimation narratives work together and interact. How I showed in all these levels that we see the push and pull between the different levels of explanation, meso, macro, micro. And this dynamic, what we argue, what is our conclusion from the paper is that the dynamic use of legitimations but by each of the groups, and we see that not one level is necessarily exclusive to one group. All the groups use the different levels of legitimation narratives, the different types of legitimation narratives. What we argue, what we think is that this dynamic use of legitimations, you know, if you are offered a micro-level justification, you counter it with a macro-level justification. If you are offered a meso-level, you counter it with a micro-level. And by this dynamic use is exactly what facilitates the gap between the democratic ideal of the right to protest and the dire reality of repressive policing. And what we see also is that the Commission of Inquiry itself, not just the reality of that we engage with, but the body that is supposed to investigate this reality, the Commission of Inquiry, serves as an arena for these competing and interacting narratives of legitimation. That's it. I concluded my